After how many years learning Blender did you start making money with it? You don't have to be a pro at a certain level to earn money with Blender. Selling assets will get smaller and smaller because AI will take over that aspect. Especially kids shows are one of the first things that will be replaced by AI. And hello again to another Q&A video. I'm Nico, I'm a freelance 2D artist, and today I'm gonna answer even more questions around the topic of Blender, 3D, and everything around that topic. And as always, a disclaimer first. I claim in no way whatsoever that I am the expert in all those topics. I mostly talk about my own personal experiences in the past, let's say 7-8 years in that field. So let's get to the first question. After how many years learning Blender did you start making money with it? Well, for me, it's a little bit more complicated because I already started using 3D when I was working full-time in an advertising agency. We used Cinema 4D back then, but then I became a full-time freelancer. And as far as I remember, I basically started making money immediately with it because I was already at a certain point where my work was good enough that I could cater to clients that were not super demanding. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from that time that I would definitely advise anyone, that you don't have to be a pro at a certain level to earn money with Blender. Because when you look at it, in all the fields that you can imagine, 3D is utilized in many ways. Oftentimes, it's not in the highest quality. Even the smallest shops on Amazon still need some images of their products to display on their shops. And even if you're very early in your 3D career, you can still create those simple assets and offer them as a service. So I would say as soon as you are at the certain level where you are comfortable with modeling in 3D and kind of lighting and just the basic stuff, you can basically immediately start advertising for yourself online and offering your services. But obviously your chances won't be super high with the top tier agencies and brands, but you don't need to do the biggest brands. That's mostly what you see online if people say they are a freelancer and working with companies. But when you look around, you'll see that there are more than just the biggest companies. They are the ones with the most exposure, but there are literally millions of companies and people who still need that service of a 3D freelancer, and those can be your potential clients. So advertise to them, and I can guarantee you that not everyone needs the top tier quality that you see in Hollywood or with the biggest brands. Many people are perfectly fine with the low tier quality of their assets or whatever they need because their budgets are small or they don't have that huge of an exposure that they need to be perfect. Obviously, the pay won't be that huge in the beginning, but from that you can build on and your reputation will grow, your portfolio will grow, and with that also your skills will grow. And with that again, your clients will be bigger, they will have more money, and the work will be maybe a little bit more complex and demanding, but you will learn from that again, and this is how you grow as an artist. Eevee or cycles? What do you use? Does it depend on what you are trying to achieve? Well, yes, it's that simple. It totally depends on what you're trying to achieve and what the purpose is. So for example, if you just need something that is more stylized or maybe a little bit low poly and doesn't need like this perfect shadow and lighting setup, then Eevee is perfectly enough for most cases. It even became even better in the last few iterations of Blender, and it's now super powerful. And also it depends on your PC. So if your machine is not that powerful, then Eevee is more than enough, and with that you can still achieve very good quality imagery or animations, and you won't need cycles to render hours and hours and hours, because usually Eevee is very fast and depends on the use, it can be real time, so yeah, definitely use Eevee then. By the way, there's this video of Andrew Price, who recently put out a video on how to fine-tune Eevee and how to bring the best out of it so it can actually compete with cycles. For me personally, I mostly use cycles because in my work I often rely on realistic shadows and lighting. This is a very important aspect for me, especially when it comes to building a certain atmosphere, having that haze and volumes in there, interacting with light and with shadows and everything. I like to be able to fine-tune all those details to have this perfect kind of mood setup. And recently cycles got even faster and even more efficient, that even if you don't have the biggest machine, it can still work pretty well actually. My PC, for example, I have a GPU that is a 2080 Ti, and it's not the greatest one, it's very old already, but it still can run most of my scenes very well, and for that I have no problem with working with cycles most of the time. I've been using Blender for the past 3 years and I want to start getting into sculpting. I'm just wondering if having a 3D tablet is an absolute necessity in having success in sculpting. If it is, do you have any recommendations? So I would say for sculpting, it's not a necessity. If you can work very well with a mouse, then it's perfectly fine. But if you have a little bit of money left, I would definitely recommend a 3D tablet, because especially for sculpting, it is very advantageous to have this kind of natural movement of the hand translated onto your 3D subject. Because sculpting is a process that we maybe know from our childhood, and we know how to use our hands and how to sculpt maybe something from clay. And when you want to translate it into the virtual world, then a mouse is a very indirect approach to sculpting. But when you basically, with your pen, you can touch it and sculpt and carve into it, or add more to it, then it becomes a very natural process where you don't even think about the technical aspects. You basically just draw on the tablet and you sculpt with your hand, and it becomes second nature very fast because you don't really think about it, you basically just do. And the additional aspect is that it is even more fun, I would say. So I use a tablet, and I use it not just for sculpting, but for everything else. Especially in Blender, it is super fun to just take the pen and just orbit around your objects and scale and move them and move everything around. It feels very natural to just take your object and move it directly with your hand instead of having that disconnect with your mouse. Especially orbiting around, looking around it, you directly manipulate the object with your hand. So this is very fun, and I can't imagine going back to just working with a mouse. So in the end, it's perfect for sculpting. It's also perfect for maybe drawing textures and texturing your models. You can be very precise with the pen, so that's really cool. Every discipline that needs that precision, but also that natural movement of your hand, for that I would definitely recommend a tablet. And speaking of recommendations, I have a tablet from the brand. It's called Huon. It's called the Huon Canvas Pro. I think it's 22-inch, and I can definitely recommend it. It works perfectly fine. The pen is really good. The pressure sensitivity is awesome, and it's also pretty big, so I can work on details and I have everything in front of me. So that's really cool. So I can definitely recommend this brand. It is also pretty cheap in comparison to all the other bigger brands like Wacom or XP Pen. So if you want to get into sculpting or working with Blender with a tablet, then I can definitely recommend Huon. And by the way, this is not a sponsored segment. I just bought it one time because I needed it for texturing. So I'm super happy with it, and I wouldn't want to work any other way anymore. So I'm gonna answer the next two questions in one go because they are very similar. How do you deal with lag and load time with your bigger blend files? I'm currently working on a blend file that is about 5 gigabytes. And it alone, with a bunch of meshes and animation data, takes about 12 minutes to save. Geez, 12 minutes is definitely too much. I would also say that 5 gigabyte is definitely too big of a file. And I assume maybe you still use a regular hard drive instead of an SSD. I would definitely recommend please use an SSD for your blend files, because saving is a lot faster. You will literally feel it. And a 5 gigabyte file will maybe take 10 seconds or maybe 15 seconds, but 12 minutes is definitely too much. The second question is, do you have any advice for handling complex scenes beyond the basics of linking instancing assets wherever possible to save memory, and managing collections meticulously to save sanity? Well, my tips would actually be those. So I don't have a huge amount of additional information for that. But for the first person and in general, I would definitely recommend, first of all, using instances as much as possible. If you copy an object with Shift-D, it creates a copy of the object, but the mesh will be calculated twice. And if it stays the same, that there is no need to have the same object twice when it has to be calculated twice. So for that, I definitely recommend using Alt-D to duplicate, to create an instance. So when you change the mesh will be changed in both instances. This will already save a lot of memory and a lot of computational time, and everything will go faster for sure. You will also see, if you duplicate your mesh with Alt-D and check the information of the scene, you will see that Blender doesn't count all those additional vertices and triangles because it doesn't have to compute them over and over again. I can also recommend instancing whole collections. So if you have created an asset that is made out of many objects, you can put them in a collection, and with Shift-A, you can instance that collection into the scene again. But it's not a perfect process. The object, for example, needs to be in the center of the world, so the pivot point of the instance is also in the middle. But I found out that you can actually create assets in a separate scene of that file. You create your collections, your assets, they are all in the center, and you can instance them in your original scene just from the second scene, if that makes sense. So that will also help you a lot with memory, with time, with rendering. And for that, there is even an add-on. It's called Quick Instance or Quick Grouping, I believe. And with that, just by pressing Ctrl-G, you will create an asset out of many objects, and it will automatically create a separate scene that is called library. where all the original files will be stored, and in your first scene you will have only the instance of that. So that is a really cool add-on. I can highly recommend it, and this will make everything a little bit more efficient. Also, it was already mentioned, linking files into other blend files is really cool. For example, if you have a big environment and this won't change in the course of maybe an animation, then create the environment as a separate file and then just link it into the file, and you won't be able to manipulate it, but it won't make the file also bigger because it's referencing all the data from a different file. So saving will go very quickly, even though you have linked a big scene into your file, and you can still manipulate your linked file if you have the following add-on also installed. It comes with Blender. It's called Edit Linked Library. And with that, you just click on your instance object, you click one button and it opens the linked file. You can edit it, you can manipulate it, you can change it. And with another press of a button, you save it and you jump back into your original scene where that asset is linked in. So these two are already the biggest tips that I can give in terms of saving memory, saving time, and making your file smaller. What also makes files smaller is definitely texture sizes. So if you use textures and you see that they are not really important, then definitely try to make them smaller, either in Photoshop or any other software. Scale them down, because especially textures, when they are like 4K, 8K, they take a lot of memory, they take a lot of space in the file, and in the end saving will take a long time, and also the file would get huge, and rendering would also get huge because all those textures need to be calculated. So take a few minutes extra and just see if the texture is far away from the camera and it's 8K, 16-bit, EXR, whatever, then it doesn't need to be that. At regular JPEG and 2K, maybe 8-bit will be more than enough. What you can also do is, what I like to do is create a trim sheet of all the textures that you want to use. So create just one texture that is very high res, but put all your textures on top of it. And in the end, you will just have one file on different parts of your scene. And in the end, you just need to put the UV on top of that part of the texture that you want to use. And this will save you also a lot of time, a lot of memory, because in the end, in the whole scene, you will just use that one texture. But if you already have a very complex file and you want to maybe make it a little bit more efficient, a little bit more optimized, I can also highly recommend this add-on. This is called To Optimize Tools. This costs a little bit, but if you're working with big scenes, it's definitely worth the money, because what it does, it color codes your whole scene, and all the meshes that are very dense are coded red, and the more red or orange these are, the more dense the meshes and the more vertices and polygons it has. So with that, immediately you see in your scene which assets need to be optimized or maybe decimated. So this is a very fast way to immediately see where do I need to put even more work into. But it also has more features like deleting unused materials, deleting unused images, or even downscaling your images if they take up too much space. It can also analyze your whole scene and tell you where the bottlenecks are, what texture takes up most of the space on your hard drive. Do you have any advice for making photorealistic lightning? I'm planning to have an old warship on the ocean and rough seas lit up by the lightning. Well, depends on what you mean by photorealistic lightning. Lightning doesn't have any textures, it doesn't have the certain geometry that needs to be realistic. It also isn't lit itself by other light sources. So photorealistic comes from other features of lightning, which is mostly the behavior and the shape. And to create realistic lightning, I would probably go with geometry nodes. There are very cool tutorials for that. I can link some of those in the description. And in the past, I also used lightning, especially in my 4th episode of my Maverick short film series. I used electricity, and for that I followed a tutorial by Joey Carlino, and he created very cool and very dynamic lightning effects. But also the behavior is very important. So I would say that study footage of lightning and try to maybe recreate it, where it strikes, how the line is moving, how long it's lit up. The timing especially is very important, how many branches it creates. So use some reference images for sure, or videos. This will help you a lot to achieve the desired effect. How and why did you start working with Blender? Well, I was always curious, and creativity was always my passion. So I knew very early on that I wanted to go into the creative field. And even back then, I was already interested in like visual effects. I saw Jurassic Park, so that interest was already peaked. But back then in the 90s, 3D wasn't really accessible as it is right now. There were a few softwares that were already there, but they were super expensive or not accessible at all. So I went into the next best thing, which is 2D design. So I've been working with Photoshop, Illustrator, and all those Adobe softwares for the past 20 years or so. And this was basically my creative outlet. and I already did most of the things that you can do with 2D. So I hit this kind of threshold where I didn't see myself advance or progress anymore. And that was a little bit sad. So I looked for new challenges, and I found first Cinema 4D. With that, I started experimenting, and I also used it in my full-time job in an agency. But even back then with cinema, there was also still the ceiling that I reached because I didn't have all the tutorials, I didn't have the expensive renderers that make everything photorealistic. So this was also very limiting. And then in 2020, COVID hit, and I had a lot of time to do research, to think about my life and my creative side, what I want to do with that. And somehow, I don't know how, but I found out about Blender. And I know Blender existed for 20 years already, but somehow I never heard about it. I don't know why. And I think it was because it hit that 2.8 milestone where it suddenly looked way better and it was more appealing. And I tried it out and I was immediately hooked. I found it very, very cool. The skip from Cinema 4D to Blender wasn't that hard. And I think in around like 3 months or so, I already reached that level that I had with Cinema in Blender. So I could completely cut off Cinema from my life, and I just started advancing in Blender. And since then, I never looked back. And this gave me another career. So in the last few years, I did less and less 2D design work, and I focused mostly on 3D. And by now, most of my client work is maybe 80% as 3D and 20% as 2D, which are still my legacy clients from back then. I love them, so I'd still do graphic design for them, but everything new, I only focus on 3D. Will I see you again at this year's BCon? So BCon, the Blender conference, yes, I will definitely be there. If you see me, please say hi. I'm mostly kind of approachable, I think. So please do. I love chatting with other people about our common passion. So yes, I will definitely be there. I won't have a talk this year. Last year I had a talk. I thought about it, but currently there's so much going on in my life, in my personal and creative, that I don't have any time to prepare anything for the conference. So I thought I'm just gonna go as a regular guest. I draw traditionally on paper and I'm getting familiar with Photoshop. I want to learn 3D for making stylized backgrounds in animation industry or realistic backgrounds in films. Which software would you recommend for me to learn? Houdini or Blender? I currently work in IT, but I would like to switch careers and have a portfolio ready in a year or so. Am I being too unrealistic? Also, is it okay if I'm learning on Apple products, Mac Studio? Some people say it is best to learn on PC. So to answer that step by step, so between Blender and Houdini, I would definitely recommend Blender over Houdini. Houdini is mostly a kind of simulation software. So you can create fire, water, smoke, everything around that. You can collapse things, you can destroy things. So that's very cool. But Houdini can also organically create environments. So this is not too far-fetched. But I would say Houdini, first of all, it's not free in comparison to Blender, but it also is a lot more complex to use. It's a more of a technical program than a creative one. In Blender, you work mostly visually with some technical aspects in there. Houdini is almost the opposite. It's very similar to coding, so you work with logic and that translates to a visual output. In Blender, it's more of a visual working and with some technical aspects to it to achieve this goal. So for creating environments and stuff like that, there are many cool add-ons that help you with that. But even without those, with the sculpting features and everything, Blender is a very good choice in terms of creating vast environments and making them look nice. But that's one aspect if you want to create 3D environments. But you also said that you want to create stylized backgrounds and you already draw and use Photoshop. So maybe the best way to approach this is to combine those two things. You can create stylized backgrounds by drawing them and then importing them into Blender and utilizing the 3D aspect and the perspective to use the best of both worlds. So the stylization can come from the drawing itself, and then you can enhance everything by giving it like a third dimension and some depth. So you can have like this parallax effect, for example. And this way you can come up with some new creative ways to display your environments. And Mac Studio is perfectly fine, so you can definitely work with Mac products. But there are still some downsides, for example, the price. Mac products are usually more expensive than maybe some custom-built PCs, and in many cases they are still not faster. Also, upgrading is not really possible or just very difficult. And as far as I know, Blender is mostly optimized for PCs and especially with NVIDIA GPUs. So if you're creating very demanding scenes and if you decide to go the full 3D route and create vast environments, then these can get very computationally heavy, and I would definitely recommend using a PC with a high-end GPU. But if you maybe decide to just draw your environments and import them into Blender as textures or as 2D elements and layer them to achieve the desired effect, then your Mac products will handle it perfectly fine, especially the newer ones with the M chip. They are already supported by Blender, so you will have probably no problem using those too. Would you be able to do a private mentor-like session for some people that are having a lot of troubles? How much would you charge per session? So yes, I would definitely do that. I already thought about it, but I still don't know how to advertise it and how to structure it, because I would need to schedule times with people, and I don't know how to do that, what service to use, maybe through my Patreon, I don't know. But I'm definitely interested in doing that. I love helping people. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have help from other people. So I love giving something back to the community. So if you're interested in a private session with me, then please hit me up on all the social medias, either through Twitter or through Instagram or whatever you use, and we can do something about it. Because I think that private sessions are a very good way to learn, because you don't need to look for someone with a similar problem. You can directly get your answer from another person live, maybe through screen sharing and stuff like that. So this is definitely a valuable thing to have, and I would definitely like to offer that. So yes. How much would I charge? I don't know. I can't say it right now. I need to think about it, but I would definitely try to make it as affordable as possible for anyone who likes to learn, because I know that people who start learning Blender oftentimes are rather young people, and they oftentimes don't have a lot of money to put into mentorships. So I would try to make the price affordable for those people, but still kind of fair. So yeah, we'll see. I've been doing this as a hobby for 3 years now. I feel I hit a wall on what else I can do. Right now I'm animating videos for my kids on YouTube. If I wanted to make some side hustle cash flow, should I just stick to YouTube videos solo developing? So that's more tricky, because if you want to make some money with creating videos, there are a few ways, but they are not very lucrative. For example, AdSense revenue on YouTube. It doesn't make a lot of money, and you have to have a large following and a lot of views to make a living from that. Me, for example, I have roughly 24,000 subscribers, and I make maybe 10 euros per month, because most of my subscribers come maybe from my Maverick short film series, but these come maybe out once a year or so, and the rest of the time I make tutorials or other 3D renders. But these videos are not going super well, so I don't make a lot of money with them, so I wouldn't rely on that maybe. So I think the best way to earn money is definitely to do some client work, and it doesn't matter if it's small or big things. If having that additional money flow is important to you, then I would definitely recommend doing some client work. And creating those videos for your kids is still a good way to advertise for yourself. So using that platform not to directly earn money, but as an advertising for your services and the level of quality that you can achieve. So this probably would be the best way to show what you can do as a portfolio kinda. Another way of making money with 3D is, for example, creating a Patreon and sharing your knowledge from your 3 years of experience. Many people are very generous and are happy to help other struggling artists, like me, for example. And they are happy to receive some knowledge, some wisdom from that field and learn from you. And in exchange, they're happy to give you some money. So that can also be a good side revenue income. The next thing is also maybe selling your assets and your 3D models. And for now, this can still work, but you still need to know that asset libraries and websites selling 3D assets are full of all kinds of 3D assets. With just regular assets, you won't come pretty far, I think. They probably would need to be very unique and very special to be recognized. Also, the AI bubble is slowly growing into the 3D field, and especially AI-created assets are getting better and better. The topology gets better, they are more high-res, they are getting smarter so they can analyze photos way better and create those assets for you. And as grim as it sounds, I think that field of selling assets will get smaller and smaller because AI will take over that aspect and create any asset that you want for you just from photos or from descriptions. So that I unfortunately see hard times for people who live from creating assets. They will still exist, but then those assets won't be those simple ones, but rather artistically unique assets that won't be possible to be created by AI because they have this unique style of yours. And while we're talking about AI, this topic is mostly part of every of my Q&A videos, especially kids shows and kids films are one of the first things that will be replaced by AI. Because to be honest, kids, especially when they are very young, they don't actually care about a certain level of quality. They don't care if the animation is a little bit janky or doesn't follow some rules of physics. They don't care if a character has, for a second, maybe 6 fingers or has some weird artifacts. Kids just want to see very colorful, very short little episodes where the characters jump around and do funny things. That's mostly more than enough for them. And AI is already very good at that. So if you see what the most recent AI models are capable of creating, this is definitely good enough for a child to be entertained by. And I can kind of understand production companies seeing that as a way faster and way easier way of creating those shows. Also, the writing doesn't have to be like top tier quality, because again, kids, I would say maybe up to like maybe 4 or 5 years, they don't demand the best writing in the world. It just has to be very simple, and that's more than enough. So I would say for your YouTube videos that you do for your kids, if it's fun for you, then please continue doing them, because it's also about you and your work. But if you only do them to make money, then maybe try to find other places that you can apply your 3D skills into that still will be relevant in the future. What is your approach to rigging complex hard surface robots, particularly non-bipedal rigs? Do you build custom control systems to animate them, or just drive the bones manually? So my approach usually depends on what I want to use them for. So when I create, for example, a robotic arm that has a lot of complexity, I mostly create those rigs from scratch by myself, and I customize them in the way that I need them. And I oftentimes also build those systems and constraints into them that they work automatically, so I don't need to manually animate every single detail. That's also one of the most fun things for me, to create like this elaborate system that I only use one controller maybe, and everything else moves accordingly to the laws of physics and the mechanical principles. When it comes to characters, I also mostly created my rigs by myself. But recently they became so complex that I also started using Riggify for Blender. This is an add-on, by the way, that comes with Blender. It's free. And this helped me a lot of not only having a more robust rig to work with, but also understanding how it works was very interesting to me. So in the future, when I create new customized rigs, I have a few more tricks up my sleeve to create those. But when it comes to my most complex robots, for example, those for my short films, I use a combination. So I create a custom Riggify rig for the character itself, but then I add additional rigs just for the mechanical parts and attach them to the main body rig so that everything works in combination, but I still have separate support rigs that I can just hide and not deal with it and just animate the main character. How do you accomplish the animations of complex multi-object assemblies, exploding or reassembling from a single point in space? I'm assuming these are separate instances of the rig which are unparented for this specific sequence. Well, not exactly. These are for the most part done with geometry nodes. So geometry nodes is really, really good when it comes to offsetting the position of a large amount of objects and putting them out there and moving them left and right, rotating them. And I think you're talking about this video here. For this, I used a tutorial by Cartesian Caramel. He has a Lego assembly tutorial, and I was able to use that system and customize it a little bit so I could use it for my complex robots. And for each body part, there is an empty that is assigned to it. And when I move it away, it explodes basically, or it assembles again. And you are very flexible with just moving this one empty, and all the parts will move around it. You are very flexible in customizing it in terms of how they behave, if they rotate, if they scale maybe and get smaller the further away they go from the robot. And by the way, if you'd like to use my system, I have it on my Patreon, so you can just join and then you can play around and use it for your own purposes. Okay, so this was a lot of fun. Thank you again for all those questions. If you have even more questions, then please write them in the comments below and I will make sure to answer them in my next videos. And now comes the YouTube thing again. So if you like this video, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more of those videos, then please subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to support me even more, then Patreon is the best way to do so. I have a ton of cool things, including tutorials, behind the scenes. I share my files and my assets. And you also get access to my beginner's rigging course, where in each episode you learn new principles of rigging, including things like robotic arms, legs, cables, gears, and pistons. So thanks again for watching and see you in the next one. Take care and bye-bye.